The rain had been falling since early afternoon, soft enough to blur the city lights without hiding them completely. Every street reflected pale gold from the old lamps above, turning cracked sidewalks into ribbons of light. Most people hurried past with their heads lowered, eager to escape the weather. I never hurried anymore. There had been Thursday evenings belonged to me. Every Thursday, just before 7, I walked into the same small diner on the corner of Ashford and Pine. The place was ordinary in every possible way. The coffee was strong, the pie was homemade, and the radio always played songs that sounded older than the building itself. That was exactly why I kept coming back. No one there cared who I had once been. To them, I was simply Graham Mercer, a quiet customer who preferred black coffee and usually sat beside the window. The little bell above the entrance rang as I stepped inside. Warm air wrapped around me, carrying the comforting smell of fresh bread and cinnamon. Outside, the city felt cold and distant. Inside, life moved gently. A retired couple shared dessert near the window. 2 college students argued over homework while laughing between every sentence. For a few moments, I could almost believe I belonged somewhere. "Good evening, Mr. Mercer." The familiar voice drew my attention toward the counter. Rowan Hale balanced 2 coffee mugs on a tray before placing them carefully onto another table. He couldn't have been older than 25. Yet there was a quiet patience about him that reminded me of someone much older. His smile reached his lips. It rarely reached his eyes. Those eyes always carried a sadness that seemed carefully hidden from everyone else. "You're right on time," Rowan said with a small grin. "I usually am." He laughed softly. "I've already started your coffee. You know me too well. I've had plenty of practice." Our conversations were never long. Weather, books, music playing through the old speakers. The strange customers who wandered inside during heavy rain. Nothing important. And somehow, everything important. Rowan returned a minute later with my coffee and placed the white mug carefully in front of me. "There you go." "Thank you. If you need anything, just let me know." "I will." He hesitated, then smiled once more before walking away. I watched him greet another family with the same kindness. He never looked rushed, never impatient. He treated every stranger as though they mattered. People like him were becoming rare. For reasons I couldn't explain, I found myself looking forward to these Thursdays more than anything else in my week. Not because of the coffee, not because of the diner, because for one quiet hour, I remembered what normal life felt like. Outside these walls, my name still carried whispers. Old enemies never truly disappeared. Old mistakes never stopped following me. But Rowan knew none of that, and I wanted to keep it that way. Half an hour passed peacefully. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The radio switched to another gentle song. I reached into my coat pocket and removed the silver pocket watch that had stayed with me for over 2 decades. The surface had faded with age. Tiny scratches crossed the metal. Inside the cover, hidden from everyone else, was a single sentence engraved years ago. "Time remembers what people forget." I checked the hour before quietly closing it again. "That's beautiful." I looked up. Rowan stood beside the table, holding the coffee pot. "I hope you don't mind," he said. "I've just never seen one like that before." I smiled politely. "It has a long history. It looks exactly like—" He stopped speaking. The color slowly disappeared from his face. His eyes remained fixed on the watch resting in my hand. "You all right?" I asked. Rowan swallowed. "My father." His voice barely rose above a whisper. "My father had a watch exactly like yours." Everything inside me froze. The diner disappeared. The music disappeared. Even the rain seemed to fall into complete silence. Only those words remained. "My father had a watch exactly like yours." My fingers tightened around the watch until the edges pressed painfully into my palm. That couldn't be possible. Only 3 identical watches had ever existed. One belonged to me. One belonged to a man I had once trusted with my life. The third? No, that story had ended more than 20 years ago, hadn't it? "I'm sorry," Rowan said quickly, taking a small step backward. "I didn't mean to make things awkward." I couldn't answer. My thoughts had already returned to a night I had spent trying to forget. Rain. Gunfire. Promise. A man who never came back. Graham. His voice sounded distant. You look pale. I'm fine. The lie barely left my mouth. Rowan looked unconvinced but nodded politely. If you need a minute, I'll leave you alone. He walked back toward the counter. For the first time in years, it felt heavier than I remembered. When I finally stood, my untouched coffee had already grown cold. I left enough money to cover the bill and quietly walked toward the door. The little bell rang once more. Before stepping outside, I glanced back. Rowan was watching me through the warm yellow light of the diner. His expression wasn't fearful. It wasn't suspicious. It was simply confused. As the rain welcomed me back into the night, one impossible thought refused to leave my mind. If Rowan's father truly owned a watch like mine, then the past I had buried for 22 years had finally found me. The following Thursday arrived more slowly than any week Graham Mercer could remember. For 7 days, the sentence spoken inside that quiet diner echoed through every meeting, every sleepless night, and every silent drive home. My father has a watch exactly like yours. He had replayed those words countless times, hoping they would somehow change. They never did. Just before 7, Graham parked across the street from the diner. Rain had finally given way to a cool autumn evening. Golden sunlight lingered along the rooftops before fading into soft shades of blue. He remained inside the car for several minutes. Part of him wanted to drive away. The other part needed answers. At last, he stepped out and crossed the street. The small bell above the diner door chimed as always. Warm air greeted him. So did Rowan. There you are, Rowan said with a relieved smile. I was wondering if I'd scared you away. Graham managed a faint smile. It takes more than one conversation to do that. I'm glad. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It simply carried questions waiting for the right time. Rowan brought over the familiar mug of black coffee. This one's on the house. You don't have to do that. I know. He shrugged lightly. I wanted to. Graham thanked him with a quiet nod. As Rowan turned to leave, Graham spoke before he could lose his courage. Could you sit down for a minute? Rowan glanced around the nearly empty diner. His shift was unusually quiet. I think I can spare a few minutes. He slipped into the chair across the table. The evening light painted soft reflections across the window beside them. I've been thinking about what you said last week, Graham admitted. About the watch? Yes. Rowan lowered his eyes. I was worried I'd upset you. You didn't. Graham hesitated. You surprised me. Rowan rested his hands around a cup of tea. My father disappeared before I was old enough to remember him. His voice remained calm, though sadness quietly settled beneath every word. My mom rarely talked about him. Do you know why? She said remembering him hurt too much. He smiled sadly. After she passed away, there wasn't anyone left to ask. Graham listened without interrupting. Loss recognized loss. I only have a few photographs, Rowan continued. And that watch. I've only seen it in pictures. Rowan reached into the pocket of his apron and unfolded an old photograph protected inside a clear sleeve. I keep this with me. Graham accepted it carefully. The edges had faded from years of being handled. A young man stood outside a lakeside cabin, smiling into the camera. Beside him stood another man. Graham's breathing stopped. He knew that face. Not the father. The man beside him, Marcus Doyle. One of the few people who knew everything about Graham's former life. A man who had vanished 22 years ago. Graham quickly handed the photograph back before his reaction became obvious. Something wrong? Rowan asked. No. The answer came too quickly. You recognized someone. Graham looked toward the window. Maybe. Rowan didn't press further. Instead, he folded the photograph away. My mother always believed good people eventually crossed paths for a reason. Did you believe her? I wanted to. A soft laugh escaped him. I'm still trying. The conversation drifted toward easier subjects. Favorite books, childhood memories, music. Neither noticed how quickly an hour disappeared. When Rowan's shift ended, he stepped outside carrying his jacket. "You heading home?" he asked. "I was." "We're walking in the same direction." Graham nodded. "I'd like that." The streets were peaceful. Leaves drifted across the sidewalk with every gentle breeze. For the first several blocks, they spoke about ordinary things. The city's oldest bookstore, the bakery that made Rowan's favorite cinnamon rolls, a stray orange cat that regularly visited the diner. The ordinary conversations felt extraordinary. Most people spoke to Graham because they feared him. Others spoke because they wanted something. Rowan expected nothing. That realization felt strangely comforting. As they reached the riverwalk, Rowan slowed his pace. "I've always wondered something. What is it? Why do you always seem lonely?" The question caught Graham completely off guard. "I hide it that badly?" "You hide it well." Rowan smiled gently. "But sometimes people recognize feelings because they've carried them too." Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Streetlights flickered to life one by one. "My mother used to say loneliness can fill an entire room," Rowan whispered. "I think she was right." Graham looked across the quiet river. "For a long time, I convinced myself I preferred being alone. And now, I'm beginning to think I was wrong." Rowan's smile softened. "So am I." Their eyes met only briefly. Neither looked away because of fear, only because the moment felt too honest. Something delicate had begun growing between them. Not love. Not yet. Simply trust. And trust was often far more fragile. When they reached Rowan's apartment building, he stopped beneath the entrance light. "Thanks for walking with me." "I should be thanking you." "For what?" "For reminding me that ordinary evenings still exist." Rowan laughed quietly. "I'll see you next Thursday?" Graham paused. "I don't think I want to wait another week." The words surprised them both. Rowan's cheeks warmed with color. "There are plenty of coffee shops in the city." "There are. But only one has your cinnamon pie." Rowan smiled wider than Graham had ever seen. "I'll take that as a yes." They agreed to meet on Sunday afternoon. As Graham drove home, he noticed something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. It was small. Fragile. Almost frightening. Yet it stayed with him all the way home. Neither man realized that, from across the street, someone inside a black sedan had been watching their walk in complete silence. The stranger picked up a phone. "I found him," the voice said. "And he's getting close to the boy." The call ended. Far ahead, Graham and Rowan continued walking toward a future neither of them could yet imagine, while the shadows of Graham's forgotten past quietly began following them once again. Neither of them spoke for several minutes after Victor's car disappeared. The city carried on as though nothing had happened. Traffic lights changed from red to green. A bus rumbled past the intersection. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked behind a wooden fence. Yet for Graham, the world had become painfully still. Rowan finally broke the silence. "Please, tell me what's happening." His voice wasn't angry. It was frightened. Graham looked into Rowan's eyes and realized that another lie would only create a deeper wound. "I haven't been honest with you. I know. You deserve the truth." They walked without speaking until they reached the river. The water reflected hundreds of tiny lights from the buildings across the shore. The evening breeze carried the scent of fallen leaves. Graham rested his hands on the cold metal railing. "Years ago," he began quietly, "I worked for people who built their lives on fear." Rowan listened without interrupting. "I convinced myself I could change things from the inside. Instead, the darkness changed me." He lowered his head. "I made decisions that still keep me awake at night." "Were you a criminal?" Rowan asked softly. Graham closed his eyes. "Yes." The single word seemed to echo between them. "I left that life 22 years ago. I cut every connection I could. I built legitimate businesses. I spent years trying to make up for the damage I'd helped create. Then why are they back now?" Because men like Victor don't believe anyone can truly leave. Rowan folded his arms tightly against the cold. You should have told me. I wanted you to know the person I am now. And I did. But now I don't know what to believe. The words hurt because they were honest. I never lied about how I felt when I was with you, Graham said. Those evenings. They were the most peaceful moments I'd had in years. Rowan's eyes filled with emotion. I believe that. But I also believe you've been carrying this alone for far too long. A long silence followed. Finally, Rowan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the old photograph of his father. My whole life has been built around questions, he said. I promised myself that if I ever got the chance to learn the truth, I wouldn't run away from it. He looked directly at Graham. So I'm not running. Hope flickered inside Graham's chest. But I need complete honesty from now on. You'll have it. No more secrets. No more secrets. Just then, Graham's phone vibrated. An unknown number. He answered cautiously. No one spoke. Instead, a message arrived. A photograph. It showed the front of the diner where Rowan worked. The picture had clearly been taken only minutes earlier. Below it were 6 chilling words. We're always closer than you think. Graham's face lost its color. What is it? Rowan asked. Without speaking, Graham handed him the phone. Rowan stared at the image. The warmth of the evening disappeared. Someone wasn't merely watching Graham anymore. Someone had begun watching Rowan. And both of them understood the same terrifying truth. The past had stopped sending warnings. It had started making promises. The photograph changed everything. Neither Graham nor Rowan slept that night. The image of the diner remained on Graham's phone, a quiet reminder that someone was watching every step they took. By sunrise, he had already made his decision. Running would only place Rowan in greater danger. For the first time in years, Graham chose to face the past instead of hiding from it. They met the next morning at the Botanical Gardens. The same bench where they had laughed only days before now felt strangely unfamiliar. Rowan sat with his hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee. I kept thinking about what you said, he admitted. About which part? That you wanted me to know the man you've become. Graham lowered his eyes. I should have trusted you sooner. Maybe. Rowan gave a small nod. But fear makes people hide. It does. I've done it too. Graham looked at him with quiet surprise. My father disappeared, Rowan continued. After that, I stopped letting people get close. Every goodbye felt permanent. A gentle breeze carried fallen leaves across the path. For the first time, Rowan whispered, I wanted to believe someone might stay. Those words settled deeply inside Graham. I intend to. That afternoon, Graham drove them to a quiet cabin beside a lake nearly 2 hours outside the city. The place had remained untouched for decades. Inside, dust-covered old furniture. But one wooden chest sat exactly where Graham remembered leaving it. He unlocked it with a small brass key. Inside were letters, faded photographs, and a leather journal. Rowan carefully opened the journal. Several pages had been damaged by time. Then one name caught his attention. Daniel Hale. My father, Rowan breathed. Graham nodded. He was my closest friend. Rowan looked up in disbelief. You knew him? I owed him my life. They spent the next hour reading Daniel's journal together. Its pages told the story of 2 young men who had dreamed of leaving a violent organization and building honest lives. Daniel had believed people could change. Graham had wanted to believe it too. But before they could escape, everything fell apart. Daniel disappeared. Graham never learned the full truth. Until now. Near the end of the journal rested a sealed envelope. Across the front, written in careful handwriting, were the words, If Graham ever finds this. With trembling hands, Graham opened it. Inside was a single letter. If you're reading this, then fate has been kinder than I expected. If anything happens to me, promise me one thing. Protect my family if you ever have the chance. Don't spend your life drowning in guilt. Live the life we both wanted. Daniel. The room became silent. Graham could no longer hold back the tears he had hidden for 22 years. "I failed him," he whispered. "No," Rowan said softly. "You survived. I couldn't save him. You didn't stop trying." For several moments neither of them spoke. Then Rowan stepped closer. He placed a gentle hand on Graham's shoulder. "My father believed in you. I don't deserve that. Maybe not then." Rowan's voice remained calm. "But I think he would be proud of the man standing here today." The words broke something open inside Graham. Years of regret, shame, and loneliness finally surfaced. He covered his face as quiet tears fell. Rowan didn't speak. He simply remained beside him. Sometimes comfort needed no explanation. On their drive back to the city, Graham made one final decision. "I'm meeting Victor tonight." Rowan immediately turned toward him. "You're not going alone." "I have to." "You promised." "I promised no more secrets. And that means no more carrying everything by yourself." Graham smiled sadly. "You really are stubborn. I've been told that before." The meeting took place inside an abandoned warehouse near the old harbor. Victor stood waiting. "So," he said, "you finally came." "I came to end this." Victor laughed. "You think it's that simple? It has to be. You still care too much." Victor glanced toward the warehouse entrance. "I wondered if the young man would come." Before Graham could respond, Rowan stepped into the light. "I make my own decisions." Victor studied him for a long moment. "So that's why you've changed?" "No," Graham replied firmly. "I changed long before we met." "Then why risk everything?" Graham looked toward Rowan. For the first time in years, his answer came without hesitation. "Because some people remind us who we're meant to be." Silence filled the warehouse. Even Victor seemed unable to answer immediately. Finally he sighed. "I don't understand you anymore." "You don't have to." Graham placed the silver watch on a nearby wooden crate. "It belonged to the life I'm leaving behind." Victor looked at the watch but didn't touch it. "I won't come back." "And if we refuse?" Graham met his eyes. "Then you'll have to live knowing fear no longer controls me." Victor stared at him for several long seconds. Then, unexpectedly, he stepped aside. "Go." Graham frowned. "That's it." Victor looked toward the old watch. "We've all spent too many years imprisoned by yesterday." Without another word, Graham and Rowan walked away together. Outside, the night air felt lighter than it had in years. Halfway to the car, Rowan quietly reached for Graham's hand. Their fingers intertwined naturally. No dramatic declaration. No audience. Just two people choosing trust after everything they had endured. For Graham, that quiet gesture meant more than any promise ever could. The future was still uncertain. The past would never completely disappear. But for the first time, neither of them had to face it alone. Winter arrived quietly. The city woke beneath pale skies and crisp mornings. But for Graham Mercer, the season no longer felt cold. For the first time in decades, he greeted each sunrise without wondering who might betray him before sunset. The meeting at the warehouse had marked the end of one life and the beginning of another. Victor kept his word. No more threats arrived. No unfamiliar cars waited outside the diner. The silence that followed felt unfamiliar at first, but slowly, it became peaceful instead of frightening. One snowy afternoon, Rowan unlocked the front door of the diner with a wide smile. "I've been thinking," he said. Graham looked up from his coffee. "That usually means you're about to convince me to do something." Rowan laughed. "Probably." He placed a folded blueprint on the table. "I don't just want to work here. You don't. I want to own a place like this." He pointed to the drawing. "A cafe where people can stay as long as they need. No one gets rushed. No one has to explain why they're having a bad day. Just warm food, good coffee, and a little kindness." Graham studied the sketch. Large windows. Bookshelves. Fresh flowers on every table. A corner with board games and old novels. A small piano near the fireplace. "It's beautiful," Graham said honestly. Rowan smiled. "It feels like home." Graham folded the blueprint carefully. Then let's build it. Rowan blinked. You mean? I mean we're going to make your dream real. The months that followed were filled with ordinary moments. They searched for the perfect building. They painted walls together. They argued playfully over paint colors and laughed when neither of them could hang a picture frame straight. For Graham, these simple days became treasures. He had once believed happiness came from power. Now he understood that happiness often looked like sharing breakfast before sunrise or closing a cafe together after a long day. One afternoon, while sorting through old boxes from the lake cabin, Rowan discovered another envelope tucked inside Daniel Hale's journal. This one was addressed simply, "For my son." His hands trembled as he unfolded the letter. Graham sat beside him but remained silent. Rowan read every word slowly. His father's handwriting spoke of hope rather than regret. Daniel wrote about kindness, about choosing compassion even when the world rewarded cruelty, about believing that love was never a weakness. Near the end of the letter, Rowan paused. Tears quietly filled his eyes. Graham gently squeezed his shoulder. What did he say? Rowan smiled through those tears. He wrote, "If you're lucky enough to find someone who makes your heart feel safe, don't let fear convince you to walk away." He looked at Graham. "I think he would have liked you." Graham swallowed hard. "I hope one day I'll deserve that." "I think you already do." Spring arrived with blooming flowers outside the cafe's windows. The sign above the entrance was finally raised. The Silver Watch Cafe. The name honored the object that had brought two strangers together and reminded them that time could heal as well as hurt. On opening day, neighbors filled the tables. Some came for the coffee. Others came because they had heard the owners greeted every guest like an old friend. An elderly woman smiled as Rowan served her tea. "This place feels peaceful," she said. "That was our hope," Rowan replied. Across the room, Graham watched quietly. He no longer wore expensive suits every day. He discovered that serving others brought a different kind of fulfillment, one built on trust instead of fear. Late one evening, after the final customer had left, Rowan locked the front door. Outside, soft rain tapped gently against the windows, just as it had on the night they first met. The cafe was quiet. Only the ticking of an old wall clock filled the room. Rowan walked to the glass display near the counter. Inside rested the silver pocket watch. Its surface still carried the marks of time. Beside it sat a small card. "Every second offers another chance to choose kindness." Rowan smiled. "Funny, isn't it?" "What is?" Graham asked. "If I hadn't noticed that watch, our paths might never have crossed." Graham nodded. "And I'd still be hiding from my past." Rowan reached for his hand. "You aren't hiding anymore." "No." Graham looked around the warm cafe, the shelves filled with books, the laughter that had echoed through the room all day, the gentle light reflecting from the windows. For years he had searched for redemption in impossible places. He finally found it in ordinary moments shared with someone who chose to stay. "I love you," Graham said quietly. The words were simple. They carried no grand performance, only truth. Rowan's eyes softened. "I love you too." Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the streets clean. Inside, two lives once shaped by loss had become a home built on trust, forgiveness, and hope. The silver watch continued to tick, not as a reminder of years that had been stolen, but as a promise that every new day offered another beginning. And sometimes, the smallest moment, a shared cup of coffee, a familiar smile, or a simple sentence spoken by a stranger, could change the course of an entire life forever. If the story touched your heart, remember that healing rarely arrives all at once. It grows through patience, honesty, and the courage to let someone stand beside you. And if you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for another story where hope quietly finds its way home.